Framed by James Ponti, Chapter 7. Seen but not heard. Agent Rivers was intrigued by my story of the man in the European shoes, but as far as clues and potential leads went, it was way down the list. It had been 2 weeks since Margaret and I had seen the man, and the museum was an active crime scene with fresh evidence to be gathered and security footage to be viewed. Rivers let me stay because every copyist has to apply for a permit. When there was a free moment, he planned to have someone get the application so I could look at the ID photos and see if any belonged to the man. Until then, I was supposed to sit in the back of the room and wait. Silently. The silent part was stressed more than once, but I didn't mind. I had a front row seat to an actual mystery, and my father was one of the good guys trying to solve it. It was beyond cool. I listened carefully as they recreated the events of the night. Start at the beginning. Rivers instructed. How did someone take 3 paintings without setting off an alarm? Our security software is all being updated, Miss Miller explained. Earl was in charge. That's right, he said. We have fixes every few months, but this is the first major overhaul in years. The entire system had to be taken offline while it rebooted. That meant we had no cameras, motion sensors, or alarms. We were totally dark. There are supposed to be countermeasures when you do that, said the British man. There were, answered Miss Miller. We overlapped shifts, so we had an extra guards along the perimeter of the building during the upgrade. And they didn't see anything? Asked Dad. Nothing out of the ordinary. I'm sorry, interrupted the agent, looking at the British man. Who are you again? Oliver Hobbs, he said. I'm with the insurance company. And were you here during the reboot? He asked. No, they called me after the paintings were found missing, he said. And when was that? The agent asked. The system went down at 1:15 and everything was back up and running at 1:32, said Miller. A custodian noticed a painting was missing and sounded the alarm at 1:51. Rivers wrote down the times in a notepad he carried. The mention of the custodian reminded me of the scene in the rotunda when we arrived. I scanned the monitors and saw that the police were still questioning the cleaning staff. There were 5 custodians waiting by the fountain, while 2 others were talking to detectives off to the side. All of them wore matching blue coveralls. Their work carts were lined up in 2 rows of 4 on the far wall. I wish the monitors had sound so I could eavesdrop. On another pair of monitors, I saw the crime scene unit looking for evidence in the rooms that had been burglarized. I was amazed by how meticulously they worked. Then something struck me, and I looked back at the screen showing the rotunda. There were 2 rows of 4 work carts, which made a total of 8, but there were only 7 workers. Someone was missing. I checked the other monitors, looking for anyone else in blue coveralls. There was none. Dad! I blurted out excitedly. Dad! The conversation at the table stopped abruptly and everyone glared at me. You really need to be quiet, Florian, my father said impatiently. We have to focus on this. One of the custodians is missing, I said, pointing at the monitor. What do you mean? Asked Agent Rivers. There are 8 carts, but only 7 custodians, I explained. Where'd the extra cart come from? The agent walked right up to the monitor and tapped each person on the screen as he counted. 7. He didn't say a thing. He just bolted out of the room with Serena and Earl right behind him. That left me alone with my father and Hobbs, the insurance agent. Dad came over and sat next to me. I'm sorry, I said. I know I wasn't supposed to talk, but it's okay, he assured me. That was great that you noticed it, although maybe not so great for them. On the screen, we could see Rivers pull the detectives aside and start a heated conversation. Once again, I wish there were sound on the monitors. I owe you a huge apology, Hobbs said as he approached and offered his hand. I was stressed and upset, and I took it out on you. I hope you can forgive me. Of course, I said. It's pretty crazy having a 12-year-old interrupt a crime scene. I probably would have reacted the same way. Oliver Hobbs, he said as we shook. Florian Bates, I replied. You said you work with the insurance company, right? Yes, he answered. The museum called me right after they called your dad. Oliver and I have crossed paths often, said my father. Yeah, your father's one of the best in the business, he replied. I was relieved to see that he's part of the recovery team. Before we could continue the conversation, Agent Rivers and the others returned. What's your name? he asked as he strode back to the main console. Florian Bates, I replied. How old are you? 12. Well, 12-year-old Florian Bates, you're officially smarter than the detectives of the Metropolitan Police Department. They had no idea they were missing a custodian. He turned to Miss Miller. Can you pull up the security video starting at 30 minutes before the robbery? Of course. She nodded to Earl, who sat down and started typing. Within seconds, the monitors were filled with footage from earlier in the night. The time on the bottom of each image read 12:45. What are we looking for? Asked Dad. A guilty-looking custodian, said the agent. Even sped up, the footage was incredibly boring. We were about halfway through it when Hobbs shook his head and complained, They're all the same size, they're wearing identical uniforms, and they're looking down, not at the cameras. I didn't say it would be easy, replied Rivers. What were those shoes you were talking about? It took me a moment to realize he was asking me. What? I asked. You said he had on a special type of shoe, he replied. If he's our guy, he may have the same shoes on in this picture. I hadn't even thought about that. Brilliant, said Oliver. Check the shoes. For the first time, I moved over from the couch and stood next to them, examining each pair of shoes on the screen. First, it was exciting. Then it was nerve-wracking. And finally, it was embarrassing. We went back and forth over an hour and a half's worth of security footage, and there was no sign of the man in the Europa trainers. I was so certain we'd find him. I was certain I'd be a hero. My clue was a dud. Guess I was wrong, I said softly. Don't sweat it, said the agent as he put a friendly hand on my shoulder. I still want you to look through the applications to see if you can identify him. You never know how these things come together. I forced a smile and nodded. Look there, said my dad, pointing at one of the monitors. Who's that? The monitor showed the exterior of the building as a man in a blue custodian's uniform crossed Constitution Avenue and disappeared into the darkness. I think that's our 8th custodian, said the agent. What's the time? 1:43, answered Earl. What time does the custodial shift end? Not until 4, he replied. Agent Rivers turned the knob to make the video play in reverse and stopped it at the point where we had the best view of the custodian. It still wasn't much to go by. His back was turned to the camera and he was wearing a baseball cap, so we couldn't really tell anything about him. So I've got a question, said Rivers. If that's our guy leaving the scene, then where are the paintings? Chapter 8, Night Crawlers. It was nearly 4 in the morning, but the National Gallery was anything but sleepy. Since the prime suspect left with nothing in his possession, everyone was scouring the buildings to see if the paintings had been hidden in the museum. Everyone, that is, except for me and Earl. We stayed in the security center where he worked on his computer and I waited for Mom to pick me up. The mystery man in the Europa trainers was now even farther down the list of leads. I was being sent home. Did you have to stay in here just to keep an eye on me? I asked. If so, I'm really sorry. No, he said. I'm responsible for the software upgrade and I need to keep an eye on the network while it filters through the entire system. Besides, you shouldn't apologize for anything. You saved the day. You think so? Absolutely, he said. Thanks, Mr. No, mister, he replied. Just call me Earl. I smiled. Okay, thanks, Earl. This is some show we've got tonight, isn't it? He asked, looking at the security monitors. On the screens, we could see teams of police officers, security guards, and detectives hunting for any place the paintings could be hidden. There were people on ladders poking up into the ceiling tiles. There was a crew taking apart the couches in the galleries. A lot of attention was focused on bathrooms as well as the storage areas not open to the public. Agent Rivers was in charge of it all, and he marched up and down the main hallway giving orders and conferring with my father and Miss Miller. If he hid the paintings here, that means he has to come back to get them, I said. That seems really dangerous. Maybe not as dangerous as walking across the street with them under your arm, said Earl. He's obviously smart, so he must have figured out some way to get them without getting caught. And if he's smart, he must have picked those paintings on purpose, I reasoned. Something like that wouldn't be random. He gave me a look and smiled. I've been thinking the same thing all night. He typed something into the computer, and the basic information about each of the 3 paintings came up on the screen in front of us. The Dance Class by Edgar Degas, circa 1873. Oil on Canvas, 18 3/4 inches by 24.5 inches, Gallery 83. Girl in White by Vincent van Gogh, 1890. Oil on canvas, 26 1/4 by 18 1/16, Gallery 83. Child with Toys by Auguste Renoir, 1895 to 1896. Oil on canvas, 21 3/8 by 25 3/4, Gallery 85. What do they have in common? I asked. The Degas and Renoir are both French Impressionism, he said. Girl in White is technically post-impressionism, but most people don't notice the difference. Wow, I said, you really know your art. I've spent 8 of the last 10 years trying to protect every painting in this building, he said. After a while, you get to know them pretty well. Why only 8? I asked. I worked across the street at the National Archives for 2 years, he said. But I miss this place too much and begged Serena for my old job back. Since you know the painting so well, can you think of why someone would want these 3 in particular? He shook his head. Not really. They're not even the most valuable pieces in the rooms they were in. According to Mr. Hobbs, they're worth over $65 million, I said. Don't get me wrong, they're incredibly valuable, he said. But if you're going to risk stealing masterpieces, why not take the most valuable, or at least the most important works? It was a good point, but I reminded myself that monetary value and historical importance were big things, which can be misleading. I thought about the small things. I thought about toast. I looked at the images on the computer and tried to figure out what small things they had in common. The Renoir was a picture of a young boy and his nanny playing with toys. The Degas showed ballerinas in a dance class. And the Van Gogh had a woman in a dress walking through a field of flowers. No common themes. I looked at the years they were painting, their previous owners, and even the frames they were in. They still had nothing in common. I was stumped until I noticed one seemingly insignificant thing. They're the same size, I said. What? They're all within a couple of inches of being the same size, I said, not sure why it would be important. Before I could come up with anything more, my mother arrived. Since she worked at the museum, her security pass let her come right in and pick me up. I can't believe this really happened, she said, looking at all the monitors as she entered the room. They stole 3 paintings, I said, Renoir, Degas, and Van Gogh. That's what your father told me on the phone, she said, her eyes still fixed on the monitors. I just can't imagine. Florian was a big help, Earl said. I think without him, they still wouldn't have any idea what happened. She smiled. Well, thank you, but I think it's time that I take him home so he can get some sleep. Can't we stay just a little bit longer? I asked. I know you're just as curious as I am. That's not the point, she said. They've got work to do. I'm sure your dad will fill us in on everything. I said goodbye to Earl and we left. As we rode the elevator, I asked her, why would someone steal a painting because of its size instead of its value? I don't know, said Mom. Maybe the criminal has small walls and there's not enough room for bigger paintings. We both laughed at this. But it kind of made sense. Maybe there was some sort of size limit. I didn't figure out what it could be until we were in the rotunda and I saw the crime scene unit examining the extra work cart. That's when I noticed that unlike the others, the trash bag was empty. That's it, I said to Mom. Where's Dad? What's it? I know where the paintings are. I remembered my father had been walking up and down the main hall with Rivers. I started running toward where I'd seen him last. Wait for me, called Mom, trying to keep up. I found them by the fountain in the East Garden Court. The first one to see me was Agent Rivers. Rather than being angry, he seemed to move. Let me guess, he said. You've solved the case. I think so, I stammered, trying to catch my breath. This caught him off guard, and I realized he'd been joking. All the paintings are about 19 by 25 inches. I said, okay. He said, what does that matter? It's the perfect size to fit in his trash bag. That's how he went from room to room without anyone noticing. The paintings were in his trash bag on the cart, and that's how he's getting them out of the building. They're in the trash, exclaimed Rivers. So he doesn't have to come back for them, I responded. The garbage truck will pick them up for him. Where's trash collection? He asked Miss Miller. Right this way, she said, pointing. Everyone rushed out to a loading dock where there were 3 large dumpsters, 2 blue and 1 green. Even though it was the middle of the night, a truck was backing up to pick up a blue one. It turns out that a lot of the city's garbage is collected at night, when the tourists and government officials are gone. Stop! Right now! Rivers said, holding up his badge. Nobody move! A very dedicated team of FBI agents spent the next 30 minutes digging through the dumpsters and bags of trash while detectives questioned the garbage crew to see if they might be involved. They didn't find anything until they checked the green recycling dumpster. All 3 paintings were found tucked in a stack of cardboard boxes that had been folded and bundled together. The size was the key. If they were just a few inches bigger, they wouldn't have fit in the bundler. 12-year-old Florian Bates, Agent Rivers bellowed. You are not just smarter than the officers of the Metropolitan Police Department, you are smarter than all of us. My mom and dad laughed, but the strangest thing happened. The searchers all turned to me and gave me a round of applause. I'd never felt anything like it before. Chapter 9, Sunday Sauce. I woke up with my head at the wrong end of the bed, completely unsure if the 4:15 on my clock was morning or afternoon. It was just like I was in Napoleon's portrait, only there were no candles to help me solve the mystery. The most disorienting part was the amazing aroma that filled the air. It was the unmistakable, mouth-watering smell of my mom's Sunday spaghetti sauce. But this was Saturday. Or at least I thought it was. There was a decent chance I'd slept for an entire day. Either that or I was having a hallucination. Is there such a thing? Mom? I called into the kitchen as I walked down the stairs. Ah, look who's awake. Her hands were busy grating Parmesan cheese, so she bypassed the hug and leaned over to kiss me on the forehead. Hello, sleepyhead. It's not Sunday, is it? I asked, a bit nervous. No, it's still Saturday, she replied to my relief. I figured I'd break with tradition and make your favorite meal a day early. You know, because you're such a great son. Oh, and the part about you saving over $65 million in art from being stolen didn't hurt? I smiled. That really happened, huh? I thought maybe I dreamed it. No, it happened, exclaimed a voice. I turned to see Margaret sitting at the table, a big goofy grin on her face. It's all over the news, and I have been waiting all day to hear the inside story, she continued. Hey, Margaret, when'd you get here? After my game. It was only then that it registered she was wearing her DC Dynamo soccer jersey. Oh, wait, today was the playoffs. Did I miss it? Just by a couple hours, she said. And it's a shame because I was amazing. In fact, the reason I came over was to give you a hard time for missing it. But then your mom told me about what happened, and I figured it was an acceptable excuse. Barely acceptable, but acceptable. Did you win? I asked. 4-0. Remember the part about me being amazing? She said. But we can talk about soccer later. I want to hear about the robbery. It's all over the news. But there hasn't been anything about a 12-year-old boy as part of the story. Start at the beginning. You know, right after the part where I had to convince you the copyist was suspicious and worth looking into. Start there. I laughed and began to fill her in on what had happened. I told her about arriving at the crime scene and telling the FBI about the copyist. I went through the details of the missing janitor and the search for the 3 paintings. I explained it all. And by the time I got to the discovery of the paintings, she and my mother were on the edge of their seats. Mom had only heard bits and pieces of it before I went to sleep. Mom and I were about to leave when I finally realized the importance of the size of the paintings, I said. I still don't get that part, Margaret said. They had to be small enough to fit into the garbage bag on his cart, I explained. But more important, they had to fit into the machine that bundled all the cardboard boxes together for recycling. It was a great plan because the boxes provided padding to protect the paintings from getting hurt. And the recycling truck would have actually taken them out of the museum. All the thief had to do was wait for them to be delivered at the recycling center. That is amazing, Margaret said. After they found the paintings, did they catch the guy who stole them? Did they find the 8th janitor? Actually, I don't know. I've been asleep, Mom. Not yet, she answered. Your dad said the FBI set up a stakeout at the recycling center, but he didn't show up. He's still out there somewhere. That made me happy they hadn't mentioned me on the news. I was part of the reason someone lost $65 million. He was mad, and the last thing I wanted was for him to even know I existed. So who's hungry? Asked Mom. I think we should go ahead and eat without your dad. There's no telling when he'll get home. The spaghetti was delicious, of course, and while we ate, I tried to fill in any gaps I may have left in the story. We also got Margaret to tell us all about her soccer game, which on any other day would have been the big news. Does that mean you're in the WAGS championship? I asked as I twirled some pasta onto my fork. We play the final next week, she said, and I better see you there. I wouldn't miss it, I said, unless of course the FBI needs any more help with international art crimes. What's WAGS? Asked my mother. Washington Area Girls Soccer, explained Margaret. It's made up of leagues all over the district. There are about 100 teams in our division. And you're playing in the championship? Margaret nodded and smiled. That's impressive, said Mom. Just then, the front door opened and my dad hurried into the house. Hello, he called out. In here, said Mom. Sorry, we started without you. We didn't know when you would get home. Actually, I'm just here for a second, he replied as he came into the kitchen. I'd like you to meet someone. Hello, Mrs. Bates, said the man following Dad. I'm Special Agent Marcus Rivers of the FBI. We didn't get a chance for an official introduction last night. Well, you had a lot going on, Mom joked as she stood up and shook his hand. He's the agent in charge, I whispered to Margaret. Despite the fact that he probably hadn't slept all night, Mr. Rivers still looked as sharp as he did the night before. The only difference was that he'd switched from the dark blue suit to a gray one. Would you like to stay for dinner? Asked my mother. He took a deep whiff and practically swooned. I'd love nothing more, but I'm in something of a fluid situation at the moment. He turned his attention to Margaret and me. Florian, is this the friend you were with when you saw the man in the museum? Yes. I said, this is Margaret. Nice to meet you, Margaret, he replied. I don't mean to be rude, but how can I get in touch with your parents? My parents? She asked. Am I in trouble of some kind? Of course not, he said. It's just that you're a minor and I'm going to need them to be involved. I think they're at the grocery store, she said, but they should be back in half an hour. Rivers checked his watch and looked back up at her. Actually, we don't have that much time. Why don't we call them there? He handed his phone to her. Just dial the number. What's going on? I need you both to come down to the Hoover Building. What's the Hoover Building? I asked. FBI headquarters.